Week 7, Adaptation. Adaptation, it's all about change. Have you ever started at a new school? Remember how you had to meet new teachers and classmates and remember their names? You probably had to learn the fastest way to get to your classroom. Maybe you figured out everyone needed to bring a sweatshirt to the library or Mrs. Topp's room where it always seemed to be cold. During those first few days, you were getting used to the new environment of your school. And more importantly, you were changing your behavior to adjust to the new environment. In other words, you were adapting. So adapting means that you change your behavior to adjust to the new environment. All living things must adapt to their environments. For humans, that's not usually too difficult. We can put on a coat or turn on the air conditioner if it's too cold or hot. But for every other animal on Earth, it's more complicated. Think about it. What can squirrels or birds do when they get cold? They just can't grab a sweatshirt like we can. They have to find other ways to adapt the environment. Some animals hibernate, some migrate, others grow thicker fur in cold seasons. These are all examples of adaptations or changes in response to an environmental change. Change is a big part of science. Living organisms can change or adapt to the environment around them. If the environment changes, then the living organisms must adapt to those changes in order to survive. Since most environments change slowly, adaptations happen slowly too. In this week's issue, we'll look at all the ways plants and animals have adapted to their environments. What kinds of adaptations are there? How do they happen? Adaptation is a very important science topic because for plants and animals, it can mean the difference between life and death. Adapted for survival. For a species to survive, it must exceed at three very important things: withstanding its physical environment, avoiding predators, and reproducing. It's no surprise that almost all adaptations help with one of these tasks. Animal adaptations. Animals have two types of adaptations, structural and behavioral. That's going to be important, of course. Structural adaptations are also called physical adaptations because they involve physical features of the animal. Let's look at some examples of structural adaptation. Structural adaptation for eating. Animals that hunt, like tigers, bears, and wolves, have sharp teeth and claws. Animals that find food in the ground, like groundhogs and anteaters, have snouts that are designed for sniffing and long tongues for lapping up insects. Grazing animals, like giraffes and zebras, have blunt teeth for biting or nipping leaves and stems. Birds of prey, like eagles and falcons, have sharp, curved beaks to attack and sharp talons on their feet for holding onto their food. Each of these structural adaptations help the animal find and grab the food it needs. Structural adaptations for movement. Squirrels have long bushy tails to help them balance in treetops and sharp claws for gripping tree trunks. Other animals that spend time in trees, like monkeys and porcupines, have smooth, hairless feet to help them climb. Birds' bones are hollow, so their bodies are light enough for flight. Fish and marine animals have streamlined bodies for moving smoothly through the water. Each of these structural adaptations helps the animal move efficiently in their environment. Structural adaptations for defense. Some animals' bodies have camouflage to help them blend in with their surroundings. Other animals use mimicry as a defense. This is when a harmless or weak animal mimics, or looks like, another more dangerous animal. Mimic means to copy or act like or look like in this case. These structural adaptations help animals avoid being seen or identified as prey or what's being hunted. Obviously, animals don't just decide to have a certain body shape or other structural feature. Structural adaptations happen very slowly during the process of evolution. They are usually the result of a genetic accident called a mutation. A mutation happens when a gene mutates or changes by accident. When this happens, offspring are born with an unusual trait. If I remember correctly, this crossword is not too easy, so I would definitely be highlighting and marking things as you read. You usually do that, but just a heads up here. Let's look at an example of how this happens. Imagine there's a species of birds, and one day the bird is born with larger eyes than the other birds in the species. The bird with larger eyes is able to spot food sooner and from farther away, so it eats more and gets stronger. The stronger bird lives longer and mates more often, so it passes this genetic trait, the large eyes, onto more offspring. Because this mutation helps the species survive, it's likely to be passed on over many generations. Eventually, almost all the birds in the species will adapt and have large eyes. Animals also have behavioral adaptations. These are behaviors that have evolved in a species because they help it survive. For example, many species hibernate or sleep during the winter months. This behavior keeps them alive when hunting would be difficult and cold temperatures would weaken them. Other animals migrate to warmer habitats during the winter. Another behavioral adaptation is social behavior. This is when a species lives and works together to ensure survival. There are many examples of social animals. Honeybees, ants, lions, wolves, and fish that swim in schools are just a few. Plant adaptations. If you think adapting is tough for animals, try being a plant. Plants can't move, so they cannot make behavioral adaptations. They must rely on structural adaptations. Over millions of years, plants have adapted to their own particular environment. That means that they would probably not survive in different conditions. Let's take a look at some of the structural adaptations of plants. Structural adaptations for survival. So as you know, right, I have you guys do this too. I'm reading all these titles and subtitles and things to you, and headings and all that. So as you're doing your crossword, it's super important for you to think, where would it make the most sense to find this? And then, oh, there's someone outside and Kira is barking. Sorry if you can hear that. Anyway, think, where would it make the most sense to find? And then glance at these. That's going to help you find them. Okay. In order to survive, plants need water, sunlight for photosynthesis, and roots to anchor them in soil. Plants in desert environments have adapted thin leaves and waxy coatings to conserve water. In areas where leaves are eaten by grazing animals or burned by wildfires, plants have adapted strong root systems that allow branches and leaves to grow back very quickly. Plants in low-light areas grow wide leaves that are able to maximize sunlight for photosynthesis. So that's the process of changing the sunlight into food. Structural adaptations to ensure reproduction. A species is not successful unless it survives and reproduces. So plants have many structural adaptations that help them reproduce. Colorful flowers, nectar, and sweet fragrances all attract pollinating insects to flowers. Some plants use the wind to spread seeds, so they don't need bright flowers. Oh my dear. Some flowers live only 1 year and produce lots of flowers and seeds. Others, like trees, live for many years. They spend lots of energy growing and they don't produce as many seeds each year. But over their lifetime, these plants produce many seeds so the species can continue. Structural adaptations for defense. I would just answer it real quick, but our phone is connected to the shop, and I'm guessing they're calling someone in the shop because I hardly ever get calls on the home phone. Okay. I don't know where I was. Other plants like trees live for many years. They spend lots of energy growing and they don't produce as many seeds each year, but over their lifetime, these plants produce many seeds so species can continue. Structural adaptations for defense. Plants cannot run away from threats like animals can. Instead, they use structural adaptations to help them survive when an animal wants to take a bite. Some plants, like the cactus, are prickly or spiny. Other plants have a bad odor or taste. Some plants mimic or look like a poisonous plant. So even if they can't run, some can still fight back against a hungry animal. Everyday science, changing environments. The Earth is always changing, though it takes a very long time to do it. The continents rest on giant slabs of Earth called tectonic plates. These plates are constantly moving around each other. California, for example, moves north about 1/4 of an inch every year. In the distant future, Los Angeles will be much farther north, and the plants and animals in the area will need to adapt. However, since the change happens at a slow pace, those organisms have thousands of years to make adaptations. Climate changes slowly too. Throughout Earth's history, ice sheets have covered large parts of the Earth and then receded. But like continental drift, climate change is very slow, so plants and animals have plenty of time to adapt. Other natural environment changes happen quickly, but they're usually only temporary. A lightning bolt may spark a fire that destroys a section of forest. The plants and animals that cannot avoid the fire will be harmed or killed. But the damage is only temporary, and after a few years, the forest environment will return to the way it was before the fire. Unlike most natural forces, humans change the environment rapidly and sometimes permanently. We build dams on rivers, creating flooded lakes. We convert prairies or forests to farmland. We fill in wetland areas to build homes or shops. Remember that living things adapt very slowly over generations. So when humans change the environment drastically and quickly, the living things are unable to adapt. Those that cannot move away are usually destroyed. So it's good for us to think before we build and try to reduce the harm we do to the natural environment. This week's question: why are some species endangered? As you have learned, plants and animals adapt to very slow changes in their environments, but rapid changes cause big problems for them because most species cannot adapt quickly. If a species cannot adapt quickly enough, its numbers may dwindle until finally the species no longer exists on Earth. When that happens, the species is said to be extinct. A species that is in danger of extinction is endangered. Like the dodo bird is extinct, and obviously dinosaurs, and yeah. What happens to cause some species to become endangered? One natural cause is disease, but often the cause is not natural. It's brought on by humans. For instance, humans sometimes have a non-native species move a non-native species into a habitat where it doesn't belong and where it has to compete for resources with the native species. When this happens, the native species doesn't have enough food or space to live, and it can become endangered. Another cause of endangerment is overexploitation, which means overhunting. Pollution and habitat destruction are caused by human activity too. But the news is not all bad. Humans now realize how our activities can harm species. We now know we should protect habitats, limit unnecessary hunting, and keep species in their own environments. Armed with this knowledge, we can help save endangered species around the earth. We have created national parks, nature preserves, and protected wildlife areas. Zoologists even try to breed endangered animals in captivity and release them into their natural environments. With all these efforts, maybe humans can reverse the negative effects of our activities. Maybe we can save some species from extinction. Frogs, an early warning signal. Frogs are the canaries of the coal mine. What does the saying mean? Years ago, coal miners would bring canaries in cages into mines with them. As the miners dug into the ground, they sometimes released poisonous gas. These gases had no smell, so miners watched the canary closely. If it got sick or died, they knew it was time to get out of the mine. What do frogs have to do with coal mines? Nothing really. But if we pretend our whole planet is a coal mine and the frog is our canary, then our planet's canary is falling over dead. Frogs don't adapt to changing environments as quickly as other animals, and all over the world, frogs are disappearing because of the impact people have on their environment. Why are the frogs dying? Habitat loss is a big problem. That means we're building things in places where frogs used to live. Another thing frogs can adapt to is the weed killers we use on our crops. For 50 years, we've used atrazine to kill weeds because it's not harmful to humans, but to frogs, it's terrible. Another thing frogs are sensitive to is radiation from the sun, which increases as the ozone gets damaged by pollution. There's no reason to walk around with a frog in a cage, but it would do us good to watch frogs and notice how they're doing.